The flashing red and blue lights appear behind you. Your stomach drops. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel. In a matter of seconds, what started as an ordinary drive home becomes one of the most stressful situations most Americans will ever experience. For many drivers, the focus immediately shifts to the ticket they might receive, the questions they might be asked, or whether the stop will end quickly. But according to legal experts and decades of court rulings, the most important part of the entire encounter often occurs before any citation is written, before any search is conducted, and before the officer even finishes the first few sentences. It happens during the brief moments when the officer approaches your vehicle and asks you to step outside. Those few seconds can influence everything that follows. Yet most drivers are completely unaware of how much is happening legally during that short window. The reality is that people often surrender protections they never intended to give away simply because they don't understand the significance of what appears to be an ordinary interaction. Today we're going to walk through 5 critical mistakes drivers make during traffic stops and explain how understanding these moments can help you remain calm, respectful, and informed if you ever find yourself in that situation. One of the most common mistakes drivers make occurs the moment an officer says something that sounds simple and routine. Imagine the officer approaches your window and says, "Can you step out of the vehicle for a moment?" Most people hear those words and immediately begin opening the door without giving the statement a second thought. What many drivers fail to recognize is that there can be an important distinction between a request and a direct order. When a person instantly complies without clarifying the nature of the instruction, it can create the appearance that every action taken afterward was entirely voluntary. On body camera footage, the interaction may appear to show a driver willingly participating in every stage of the encounter without any indication that they were responding to official authority. This is why legal analysts often recommend understanding exactly what is being communicated before acting. A calm and respectful question such as, "Officer, are you asking me or ordering me to step out of the vehicle?" can provide immediate clarity without creating conflict. The purpose is not to challenge the officer or escalate the situation. The purpose is simply to understand the legal nature of the request before taking action. Knowing whether something is a request or an order can help you better understand your position and the authority being exercised during the stop. Another mistake that catches many drivers off guard involves the belief that remaining silent automatically protects them. Popular culture has taught generations of Americans that silence is a shield. But the reality is often more complicated. Many people assume that simply refusing to answer questions is enough to fully exercise their rights. However, legal experts frequently emphasize that constitutional protections are often strongest when they are clearly asserted rather than silently assumed. In stressful situations, ambiguity can become a problem. A driver who intends to rely on certain legal protections may benefit from making that intention clear rather than expecting others to infer it. This is why attorneys often stress the importance of concise and respectful communication. A clear statement can remove uncertainty and create a record of the driver's intentions. The key point is not to argue, lecture, or become confrontational. The goal is to communicate calmly and professionally while making it unmistakably clear which rights you intend to exercise. Many people discover too late that assumptions and legal reality are not always the same thing, which is why understanding this distinction can be so important. The third mistake is one that surprises almost everyone, because it involves something as simple as the manner in which a driver exits the vehicle. Most people assume that stepping out of a car is just a physical action with no larger significance. In reality, the way an action appears on video can sometimes influence how the entire encounter is later interpreted. When a driver silently opens the door, steps onto the pavement, and says nothing at all, the footage simply shows cooperation. It doesn't reveal what the driver was thinking, whether they believed they had a choice, or whether they felt compelled to comply. Because of this, legal experts often emphasize the importance of documenting compliance in a respectful manner. The goal is to avoid creating confusion about whether your actions were voluntary or performed because you believed you were required to comply. At the same time, maintaining visible hands and avoiding sudden movements helps reduce tension during the encounter and promotes safety for everyone involved. Something that appears insignificant in the moment can later become an important detail if questions arise about how the interaction unfolded. The fourth mistake occurs after the driver is already standing outside the vehicle. Many people believe the most difficult part of the stop is over once they've exited the car. But in reality, a different dynamic has now begun. Standing beside the roadway can be intimidating. Patrol lights are flashing. Traffic is passing nearby. The officer may begin asking what seem like harmless conversational questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Have you had anything to drink tonight? Most people respond automatically because remaining silent in an uncomfortable social situation feels unnatural. Human beings are conditioned to answer questions when they are asked. Yet every answer creates additional information, and additional information can lead to additional questions. What begins as a routine conversation can quickly expand into a much broader discussion than the original reason for the stop. This is why many legal professionals advise people to think carefully before volunteering information. Remaining polite does not require engaging in lengthy conversation. Remaining respectful does not require providing unnecessary details. There is a significant difference between cooperating with lawful instructions and participating in an extended discussion that may not benefit you. The fifth and perhaps most important mistake is failing to understand that the first few minutes of a traffic stop often set the tone for everything that follows. Drivers frequently focus on a single moment, a single question, or a single decision, when in reality, the entire encounter is a sequence of events that build upon one another. Small actions matter. Pulling over safely matters. Keeping your hands visible matters. Remaining calm matters. Avoiding sudden movements matters. Speaking respectfully matters. Understanding your rights matters. Every one of these elements contributes to the overall interaction. People often imagine that legal protections exist only in courtrooms, but many of the decisions that influence legal outcomes occur long before anyone ever sees a judge. They happen on the side of a road during ordinary interactions between citizens and law enforcement. The drivers who handle these situations most effectively are usually not the loudest, the most aggressive, or the most argumentative. They are the individuals who remain composed, understand the basics of their rights, communicate clearly, and avoid making emotional decisions in stressful moments. The larger lesson is not about winning an argument or outsmarting a police officer. It is about understanding that knowledge creates confidence. When people understand the rules governing an interaction, they are less likely to panic, less likely to make impulsive decisions, and less likely to accidentally create problems for themselves. A traffic stop is one of the few situations where ordinary citizens can find themselves making legally significant decisions under pressure and with very little time to think. That is why education matters. The more you understand before the lights appear in your rearview mirror, the better prepared you will be if that moment ever comes. Knowing how to remain calm, respectful, and informed may be one of the most valuable skills any driver can possess. Because sometimes the most important decisions are made in the few seconds before your foot ever touches the pavement. What makes this issue even more important is that many drivers approach traffic stops with the wrong mindset. They believe the encounter is simply about a speeding ticket, a broken taillight, or a minor traffic violation. In reality, officers are trained to observe far more than the original reason for the stop. They notice body language. They notice nervous behavior. They notice inconsistencies in statements. They pay attention to movements inside the vehicle and how drivers respond under pressure. Most people think they are being evaluated only for the traffic offense, but from the moment the stop begins, every action becomes part of a larger picture. This is why experienced attorneys often say that the safest approach is not to try to out-talk the situation, explain away every detail, or convince the officer of your innocence through lengthy conversation. Stress causes people to say things they never intended to say. It causes them to guess instead of answer accurately. It causes them to volunteer information that was never requested. A simple question can suddenly turn into a 5-minute conversation, and before the driver realizes it, they have provided far more information than was ever necessary. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that honesty alone guarantees safety during questioning. Of course, nobody should lie to law enforcement. However, there is a major difference between telling the truth and volunteering information that creates unnecessary complications. Consider how often ordinary people use estimates and approximations in daily life. Someone asks how long ago you left the restaurant, and you say, about 30 minutes, when it was actually 45. Someone asks how much you spent, and you give a rough estimate instead of an exact number. In everyday life, these small inaccuracies mean nothing. During a traffic stop, however, every statement may later be compared against other information. What you intended as a harmless estimate could be interpreted as an inconsistency. This is one reason legal professionals repeatedly warn people against talking too much during stressful encounters. The more words you use, the more opportunities there are for misunderstandings, contradictions, or interpretations you never intended. Many Americans are shocked when they learn that confidence and cooperation are not the same thing. Society often teaches people that refusing to answer questions looks suspicious, while constant conversation appears cooperative. Yet the law does not require citizens to prove they are friendly, talkative, or eager to engage in discussion. Respectful silence is not disrespect. Exercising rights is not hostility. The problem is that many drivers become uncomfortable with silence and begin filling every pause with explanations. They explain where they were earlier. They explain where they are headed next. They explain why they were driving in a particular area. They explain details that were never requested. What starts as an attempt to appear helpful can quickly become a source of complications. The most effective communicators during high-pressure situations are often those who say less, not more. They remain polite. They remain respectful, but they understand that every unnecessary statement carries potential consequences. There is another aspect of traffic stops that receives far less attention than it deserves. Most drivers spend the entire encounter focused on the officer, but they rarely consider how the encounter is being documented. Modern policing relies heavily on technology. Dash cameras, body cameras, audio recordings, dispatch logs, and written reports create a detailed record of what occurred. Long after the stop has ended, those recordings may become the most important evidence available. This means that your actions are often more important than your intentions. You may feel calm, but if your movements appear rushed on video, that appearance may matter. You may believe you were cooperating, but if the footage seems to show confusion or hesitation, that perception could become significant. Understanding that the encounter is being documented should encourage every driver to remain deliberate and measured in their actions. Slow movements, clear communication, and visible hands create a record that is far less likely to be misunderstood. Another critical issue is that many people fail to appreciate how quickly a routine stop can evolve into something much larger. A driver leaves work, expecting to be home in 20 minutes. A patrol car initiates a stop for a minor traffic violation. Within minutes, questions begin expanding beyond the original reason for the stop. The officer becomes interested in travel plans, recent activities, or items inside the vehicle. The driver begins answering casually, assuming they have nothing to worry about. Yet every answer creates new pathways for additional questioning. The encounter slowly moves further and further away from the original reason the vehicle was pulled over. By the time the driver realizes what is happening, the conversation has already developed momentum. This is why legal experts frequently stress the importance of understanding the scope of a traffic stop. The less information that is introduced unnecessarily, the fewer opportunities there are for the situation to expand beyond its original purpose. Perhaps the most overlooked reality is that most people do not make mistakes because they are guilty of anything. They make mistakes because they are nervous. Their hands shake, their thoughts race, their heart pounds. Under stress, even simple decisions become difficult. People forget where documents are located. They struggle to remember exact times and locations. They misunderstand questions. They speak before thinking. This is completely normal human behavior. The problem is that normal human behavior can sometimes create unnecessary complications during legal encounters. Preparation is the best antidote to panic. Drivers who understand basic principles beforehand are far less likely to make impulsive decisions in the moment. They know how to remain calm. They know how to communicate respectfully. They know which questions deserve careful consideration before answering. Most importantly, they understand that confidence comes from knowledge, not confrontation. The truth is that traffic stops are not won through arguments. They are not won through emotional speeches. They are not won through attempts to prove legal expertise on the side of a highway. The individuals who protect themselves most effectively are usually the ones who remain composed no matter what happens around them. They do not allow fear to control their decisions. They do not allow anger to dictate their words. They do not assume that talking more will solve the problem. Instead, they focus on maintaining control over the only things they can truly control: their actions, their behavior, and their choices. That discipline can make an enormous difference when events become stressful or unpredictable. And this leads to a question that every driver should ask themselves right now. If flashing lights appeared behind you tonight, would you actually know what to do? Would you know which rights apply and when they apply? Would you know how to communicate clearly without escalating the situation? Would you know how to protect yourself while remaining respectful? Most Americans assume they would figure it out in the moment, but the reality is that decisions made under pressure are often the worst decisions we make. The time to learn these principles is not during a traffic stop. The time to learn them is now, while you're sitting comfortably at home, free from stress, free from pressure, and able to think clearly. Because when that moment eventually comes, and for most drivers it will, the difference between confidence and confusion may come down to what you knew before the lights ever appeared in your mirror.